Welcome to Crisis in Perception. So let's jump right in with a puzzle, a really big one that's kind of shaped human history for, well, forever. Right. I mean, why is it that some political systems that, when you look back, seem totally irrational, why do they stick around for centuries? How do they manage to hold on to power over millions and millions of people for so long? Well, it turns out the answer often has less to do with brute force and a lot more to do with belief. It's all about the stories we tell ourselves. It's like this invisible architecture of ideas that makes a system feel not just okay, but completely natural, inevitable even. And wow, if you want to talk about someone who just blew up the dominant story of their time, you have to talk about Thomas Paine. His little pamphlet, Common Sense, it wasn't just some argument for independence. No, it was way bigger than that. It was a full-on assault on the very story that had held up the idea of monarchy for 1,000 years. So here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at the world of kings and subjects. Then, we'll see how Paine flipped the script, calling government a necessary evil. After that, his big critique, an ass for a lion. We'll see what happens when the veil begins to rend, and finally, we'll look at how new narratives can change an old system. Okay, so let's start. I want you to try and imagine yourself back in the 18th century. We're stepping into a world where the idea of having a king wasn't just normal, it was as natural as the sun coming up every morning. See, back then, power wasn't something you won in an election. No, it was something you inherited, passed down through your bloodline. And this whole setup, people saw it as, ordained by God. It was just part of the fabric of reality. You didn't question it. You were born a subject the same way you were born a man or a woman. It was just a fact of life. And then along comes Thomas Paine. And he points out this thing that is so obvious in retrospect, but at the time, nobody was saying it out loud. He says, hey, wait a minute. We have natural distinctions like male and female. We have religious ones like good and evil. But this whole kings versus subjects thing, he argues, that's not natural at all. It's totally artificial. It's something we humans just made up. And that one simple idea, that one observation, it just changes everything. It leads to this totally radical reframing of what government is even for, right? I mean, if it's not some divine gift, then what is it? And this is where Paine makes this really brilliant move. He draws a line between society and government. He says society comes from our wants. We get together because we want to cooperate, to trade, to have friends. It's a positive thing. But government? He says that comes from our wickedness. It's basically the fence we have to build because, let's be honest, we can't always trust ourselves to play nice. His term for it was a necessary evil. It's not this glorious divine thing. It's just necessary. And its only real job is to keep us safe and protect our freedom. So here's the kicker. If government is just a tool, a human invention to solve a problem, well then we should be able to look at it and ask a really simple question. Is this thing designed well? Does it actually work? And that's exactly what he does. He shifts from asking why we have government to how our government works. He starts to take apart the machinery of monarchy piece by piece. And what he finds is that the whole design is just deeply, fundamentally irrational. I mean, just think about it for a second. If your goal is to build a tool that gives you security and good leadership, why in the world would you design it so that the only qualification is who your dad was? It's a system that completely ignores whether you're competent or wise or have any experience at all. And this is my favorite quote. It just perfectly captures Paine's sharp sense of humor. He says, nature itself seems to laugh at the whole idea by so often giving mankind an ass for a lion. It's brutal. He's saying, sure, you might get a great, strong leader, a lion, but the system makes it just as likely, maybe even more likely, that you're going to get, well, an ass. So you can really picture monarchy as the simple but really flawed machine. Step 1, a ruler dies. Step 2, power just automatically transfers down the bloodline. Step 3, the new ruler takes over. And the machine doesn't care who that new ruler is. Could be a genius, could be a toddler, could be, in Paine's own words, an idiot. The machine's only job is to follow the rule of inheritance, not to pick a good leader. So once Paine laid it all out like this, it was like he ripped the curtain back on the whole show. And once people saw what was happening backstage, the consequences were, well, explosive. And that's the power of a really big new idea, right? A true paradigm shift. Once someone points out the flaws in the design, you just can't unsee them. Suddenly, people weren't asking which family should rule anymore. They started asking a much bigger question. Why should our leaders be chosen by birth and not by our own consent? And Paine knew how powerful this was. He basically said, this kind of realization is a one-way street. Once that ignorance is gone, you can't get it back. Once you've seen how the trick is done, you can't go back to believing in the magic. The veil is torn for good. But this is where it gets really interesting, because even as the old story of monarchy started to fall apart, that fundamental human need for a story, some kind of narrative to justify who's in charge, that didn't just disappear. The system didn't break, it just evolved. Paine saw old governments as coming from one of two places. Either they were based on superstition, government by priests, or they were based on raw power, government by conquest, by the sword. But he saw a third option, a new path, a government built on the idea of the common rights of every person. And for the most part, that's what happened. Revolutions got rid of the kings and brought in republics. But think about it. We just replaced the old stories. Instead of divine right, we built these new, really powerful narratives around things like constitutions and elections and national identity. The underlying system of needing a story to justify power, it never went away. It just put on a new outfit. And that right there, that is the crisis in perception. It's that moment when we confuse the story we're told with reality itself. It's when authority starts to feel so normal, so inevitable, that we forget to even look at how the system is designed. We stop examining the machine. This is the core of what Paine showed us. Political power isn't like gravity. It's not some fixed law of the universe. It's built. It's constructed, piece by piece, from the stories we believe, the institutions we create, and the rules we agree to live by. And understanding that it's all a human design, well, that's the very first step to understanding power itself. So that leaves us with a pretty big question, doesn't it? If all political authority is constructed, what are the stories constructing ours right now? What are those invisible narratives that we accept every day that decide who has power and why?